Our home on planet Earth is full of strange occurrences, oddities, and the unexplained. Oftentimes, we are quick to look for some means of scientific explanation to explain what we don't understand. The unbelievable events that sometimes occur right before our very own eyes. Let me ask, what happens when there isn't an explanation? And what happens when the said event is caused by you? This is the strange story of Donald Decker. Donald Decker, known as Don or Donnie to his family, had somewhat of a checkered past. When he was just 21 years old, in 1983, he was serving a 4 to 10 month sentence for receiving stolen property at the Monroe County Correctional Facility in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. Everyone makes mistakes, and his charge was nonviolent, so Don was granted a period of compassionate leave to attend the funeral of his grandfather, James Kisha, in February of 1983. On the outside, Don played the part of the grieving grandchild, heartbroken at the passing of his grandfather, but inside, he was hiding a dark secret. Ever since he was 7 years old, Don had been physically abused by his grandfather and was secretly somewhat relieved that his abuser had now met his maker. It distressed Don deeply to hear everyone around him sing his grandfather's praises, and in one interview he stated, "No other part of the family knew anything about what happened, and it was like good fighting evil. The evil was gone, and I was hoping, that everything would change." But to Don's dismay, nothing had changed. Hearing his family members, more especially his parents, tell everyone what a good man James was, infuriated Don to no end, and he left the funeral early. At this time of his compassionate release, Don was staying with his friends, Bob and Jeannie Kiefer, as his mother refused to have him in the house. Don arrived at his friend's house and went to the bathroom to clean up before supper. As Don ran his hands under the taps, he felt an eerie chill wash across him, and within an instant, he fell to the floor and began having a vision of a strange old man wearing a crown laughing at him. When he came to, he looked down and saw 3 deep claw marks on his right wrist. He hastily washed away the blood, dried his hands, and went downstairs to join the Kiefers for supper. When Jeannie and Bob noticed the claw marks on Don's wrist, they were immediately concerned and began questioning him. Don informed them that these wounds were not self-inflicted and that he had a bizarre vision which he attributed to the work of Satan. Don carried on eating, and the rest of the meal continued as nothing had ever happened. Once Don and the Kiefers finished eating, they retired to the living room to finish up their evening. It was while they were sitting in the living room that Don felt the eerie chill wash over him once more, just like it had in the bathroom. Wondering what was going on, Jeannie asked Don if he was okay. As she looked around the living room, she saw streams of water running down the walls and quickly called for her husband Bob. While Jeannie was panicked, Bob had a more rational explanation for the situation and called his landlord, Ron Van Wy, to let him know that there were pipes leaking. Ron and his wife would soon arrive at the Kiefer house, only to find that there were no pipes in the front of the house and that none of the pipes throughout the house were leaking. All 4 of them were perplexed and struggled to make sense of the situation. Then, as they moved to the living room, they were met with a horrifying sight. On the sofa was a now unresponsive Don. Just minutes ago, Don had been chatting and making conversations with the Kiefers as they ate food. Now, he was staring off into space in a trance-like state. All attempts to rouse him were unsuccessful, and then Ron began noticing something very strange. Ron looked up in disbelief as the droplets of water began moving upwards like it was raining upside down inside the house. Next, the water began moving horizontally towards the kitchen, and that was when Ron decided to call the police. Officers John Bogan and Richard Wolbert arrived at the scene and were just as confused as those inside. The six of them stood and watched as water darted around in different directions, upwards, downwards, and side to side. They quickly realized that the bizarre phenomenon was contained only to the living room. The officers then ordered Don and the Kuifers to seek refuge in the restaurant across the road, while they stayed behind and filed a report. Pam Scarfano knew the Kuifers well, being just across the road from them, and welcomed them into the restaurant with open arms and a sympathetic ear. Don sat down at a table, and once more, the rain began to pour down, as if the heavens had just opened. Pam let out a shriek and ran to grab her crucifix, convinced that Don had been possessed by Satan himself. Upon giving the crucifix to Don, he complained that his skin burnt and that it physically hurt him to hold the crucifix. Not knowing what else to do, Pam told the Kuifers and Don that he needed an exorcism and sent them on their way back to their home. The Kuifers were now becoming frustrated with Don and accused him of somehow being behind all of the events, which only seemed to anger whatever or whoever was possessing Don even more. As accusations and harsh words began to fly through the air, so did pots and pans, seemingly of their own accord. According to the Kuifers, Don began levitating before being thrown across the kitchen violently. Their frustration and anger now turned to fear as 3 more deep claw marks appeared on Don's neck. By this point, the local police chief had arrived at the scene to see what all the fuss was about, and he determined that the Kuifers were suffering from a plumbing issue and ordered that his staff return to the station. No official report was filed, but the bizarre happenings continued the next day. The Kuifers woke up the next morning, hoping that the events of the night before had been a terrible dream. They were horrified to find that things were still the same and that the officers from the night before had come back to reassess the situation. Again, Don was handed a crucifix to banish him from the devil, but he still complained that his hands burned. With nowhere else left to turn, Ron, the Kuifers' landlord, began calling around every church in town, begging and pleading for their help. None of the churches would help Ron, turning him down as soon as he explained what was happening. Well, that was apart from one evangelical preacher who reluctantly agreed to help him out. The preacher arrived at the Kuifer household, armed with his crucifix and exorcism kit, and began to work his magic on Don. When the exorcism began, and the preacher began chanting his prayers, Don began convulsing violently where he stood as the rain continued to pour down. The Kuifers, Ron, and Ron's wife looked on, hoping that the preacher could save them from their nightmare. As the minutes ticked on and the rain continued to pour, they began to lose hope. Then, in the blink of an eye, the rain stopped as the preacher neared the end of his prayers. A sense of relief washed over those in the Kuifer household, and everyone present said that the mood had shifted significantly. A few days later, Don returned to jail after his compassionate leave was up, and the prison's warden immediately noticed that something was off. The once calm Don had transformed into a malevolent presence and scared the other inmates. Upon returning to jail, the mysterious rain started once again, only this time inside of Don's cell. Inmates screamed and begged for help as rain flew in every direction, seemingly at Don's command. The prison staff were a little more suspicious of Don's story than those on the outside had been. But upon entering Don's cell, the disgusting stench of death filled the air, and the rain poured once more. Now, the warden was convinced that something was amiss and called for the Reverend William Blackburn, the prison's chaplain. Reverend Blackburn performed an exorcism on Don, with the other prisoners looking on in horror as Don screamed and writhed in agony. Bizarrely, Reverend Blackburn's Bible remained bone dry as the rains poured down in Don's cell, and as he neared the end of his prayers, the rains came to a standstill for the final time. Since that day, it has never rained again at Don's command, and the whole ordeal remains a complete mystery. Experts have tried to debunk and explain the case of the man who could make it rain. However, as of yet, they have been unsuccessful in doing so. Don told investigators and journalists that he believes the spirit of his grandfather visited him to wreak havoc on his life and cause him pain from beyond the grave. That is it for this one. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't done so already, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you have a future story suggestion, please send me an email at creepyunsolvedmedia@gmail.com. I look forward to your comments below.